Hey, good day, everybody. Welcome back to Beyond the Seven, live from Jerusalem with the Rabbi Aaron David Poston. This class has been so exciting, folks. He's been teaching us of late the 48 ways to wisdom. And today we got an exciting episode. We got episode number 10, or lesson number 10. So let's tune right into Jerusalem with Rabbi Aaron Poston and see how everything's going. Rabbi, you're live on the air, sir. Please take the class away. I'm so enjoying last week's class. Was awesome. I know it's only going to get better and better.
Thank you, Dan, and welcome everybody who's watching now and who will be watching later. Shavua Tov. I'm so glad to be back.
Glad to have you, always.
Thank you. No, I'm getting a lot out of this myself because it's a great review and I go in depth. You know, I'll begin by speaking based on the book itself, what Rabbi Noah Weinberg had to say, and of course then we go to the Midrash Shmuel, and we'll go deeper and deeper into maybe sources of the Gemara, sources of Chazal, of the great rabbis, and what they had to say about this. I just want to share a little bit about my own experience first. And I was wondering whether I should do it now or later, but I might as well just let me just explain the verse. Let me take a verse first, and that is in Exodus chapter 33, verse 11. So if you want to read it, and then I'll explain it.
Exodus chapter 33 and verse 11. Verse 11 reads, "Then the Lord would speak to Moses face to face as a man would speak to his companion, and he would return to the camp, but his attendant Joshua, the son of Nun, a lad, would not depart from the tent."
So in the Hebrew, Umisharto, his servant, Yeshua ben Nun, Na'ar, it's called a lad. I don't understand. He's not an old man, but he's not a lad, okay? He's at least 40 years old. So why is he considered a lad? So that's the first question I'm going to ask. And also it said he would not depart from the tent. Lo yamish mitoch ha'ohel. So let me ask a question. Is Yeshua ben Nun, he becomes the king of Israel. He's basically in place of Moshe as the leader, right? He has the status of a king, basically. Was he the smartest? Was he the most intelligent? Was he the most charismatic? No. The Torah never describes him that way. However, this is how the Torah describes him. First of all, as a lad, when he wasn't a lad, which means that he was like hungry, like a young person, hungry for wisdom, that he would not depart from the tent. We are told, and we're going to hit this, the source. He set up the chairs. He was there from the beginning, making sure everyone had water. His Rebbe, Moshe, had coffee, right? He's going to give a long drasha. He should have, the right lighting, the right chairs. The podium is set up. The microphone is set up. And setting up the chairs for all the people who are going to learn. How great is that? How great is the merit to be involved in making sure that your Rebbe is comfortable and is able to give over, let's say in a certain atmosphere, with very honorable atmosphere, to give over the Torah. And that is one of the things we're talking about, because this number 10 is called Shimush Chachamim, to serve the wise. And we see that this elevated Joshua to the point that he actually became number 2, I don't want to say this, but it's been said, he's not the smartest tool in the shed. He's not the sharpest tool in the shed. But it doesn't matter because he had a ma'ala. He had some kind of character trait that propelled him, that elevated him, that shot him to be on the right side, of the teacher. Basically, your teacher's supposed to be on your right side. Okay, so in the beginning, whenever, he spoke, Josh was on the left, but then when more people come in, he goes to the right, because that's a certain honor that even the second, the student would stand on the Rebbe's right. Okay, when you have more than just you in the room. Okay, so I wanted to just mention about my own experience, and that is Baruch Hashem. I think I was an activist, quite an activist before I entered yeshiva at a late age of 22, 23 years old. I was putting out newsletters, activist newsletters in the secular world, let's say, or even, I was involved in other religions. So I was very active outside of Judaism with trying to, spread, I'll just call it the gospel, right? Spreading the good news. And so, I went to printers, we were doing typesetting, we were doing typing ourselves and distributing a lot of material. So when I first came to yeshiva, I had a video camera, and I remember Rabbi Zweig, he had such a big library of, I don't know if people know what I'm talking about, a cassette tape. They had cassette tapes, and it was all, numbered, and I had a video camera. I said, why don't we videotape it? I think it was the first time ever. This is going back,
VHS.
35 years ago. I think it was a beta cam. It was one of these big, thick cassettes. Anyway, and we started doing this. And so what it entails is you got to be like the first one there. You don't come in when the Rebbe's about to speak. You have to prepare. So then you prepare the lighting, and you prepare where you're going to sit and make sure everyone else not that close to you, whatever it is. There was a lot of, anytime you're doing this, you do some preparation work. So that got me going. And we did a lot of videos, and Baruch Hashem, I think it spread the Torah. But also I was they call it a ben bayit. A ben bayit in Hebrew means you feel like you're a person of the home. Even though he wasn't my physical father, but he was my spiritual father, and to hang out in the rabbi's house, because that's what we're going to talk about. Shimush Chachamim, hanging out in the rabbi's house, watching how he treated his wife, watching how he spoke to his children, watching how he paid his bills, right? But we think as very mundane things. That's what we're going to talk about tonight. What does it mean to serve the wise? What is what's the benefit to you, right? I understand if you're serving him, he's going to the mikveh, he's going to the shopping, so you're going to follow him around, and you're going to carry his bags and carry his books, but it's much deeper than that. Okay, it's not just the benefit to him; the benefit is to you, the one who's serving the wise. So Baruch Hashem, like I mentioned, that I was Rabbi Weinberg's personal secretary on Fridays for a few hours, for a bit of time. And that really also, I got to ask him if he wanted his coffee. I knew exactly how he liked it, right? Later on, when his brother, Rav Yaakov Weinberg, came to Eretz Yisrael once a year, I would mishamesh him. I was in charge of his schedule. So people that wanted appointments, and I got not just to organize the appointments, but I got to see him in between appointments and ask him questions. Rav Gil Eisenbach, who's the Mishkiach still to this day, should live and be well, was the Mishkiach of the yeshiva, and I was a personal assistant to him for many years. And again, like a Ben Bayit, also spent a lot of time in his home, and it's just unbelievable the opportunities one can have. When I lived on a yeshuv called Mali Amos, and we have Reb Zev Charlap, I was on the Vad Rav, trying to choose a rabbi, being involved with people greater than me, Rav Norworth, for example, people from the highest levels, the echelons of the great Torah scholars who helped us decide who would be the Rav. And also what I did for Eshet Torah for many years was, it sounds credible, they have a huge library. Today you can go to h.com and you could pick out so many things digitally. But back in the day, they had a tape library. It was called a tape library, where you would go and you would put, 30 agarot, whatever was a quarter, and you take a tape for a few days and you return it. So my job, I tried not to leave the Beit Midrash for anything, and one of my jobs was to run around to all the different classrooms and change the batteries in the recorders and get a new tape and make sure that the Torah was disseminated. Baruch Hashem. So I have a little bit of experience. And now today, presently, with Yibanem, what we do, you can tell from our YouTube website, our channel, we've had many greats, great rabbis speaking. So we're talking about disseminating them as well, but being involved with them, trying to decide beforehand what the topic is, what the point is we want to get across. It's outside of the classroom, going and visiting them in their homes. There's just such great benefit, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight.
Beautiful.
So the first thing Rav Noah Weinberg asked in his book, let's say, for example, someone came to you and said, I'm going to give you $10 million to build a bridge. We're not engineers. We know nothing about building bridges. I'm talking about a real structural, not like a community harmony. We're talking about building bridges, a real bridge. So what are you going to do? You're going to just wing it? I mean, come on. It's not going to happen. So you're not going to do trial and error. It's not going to work. You're going to really try to sit down and study everything you need to do to build a bridge. Well, guess what? Life is complicated. So we want to choose a career. We want to get married, raise children. We don't have any training. So where are we going to get that training from? You want to go to the wise. You want to find out from the wise. You're not going to do it based on trial and error. So basically, this idea of shimush chachamim, it means two things. Yes, it means learning because you're in their presence, but it also means assisting them, just being around them, okay? So he writes, in order to succeed in life, it's first of all, value and desire wisdom. It happens to be, I don't think anybody could disagree with this. It's the most important commodity in the world, right? And it's the key to bringing meaning to your life. So you're not going to leave it to guesswork. Now, the problem is most human beings do not like the idea of having a teacher. I'm just saying most. Obviously, the older you are, you realize, right, is one of the goals of acquiring wisdom is to know how little you actually know. So those who are wise do get it. But as youngsters, right, going through adolescence, and maybe even ask younger kids than that, do you like your teacher, right? Baruch Hashem, there are some very balanced and functional people in this world who understand having a teacher, learning is fun and learning is good. But many, I'm not sure how many, I don't know what the percentage is, we think we know it all, and we're a little bit biased against having a teacher or someone. We don't like to admit we don't know everything, right? Especially as kids. Obviously, the older we get, if you want a good job, sometimes you have to say, I'm a quick learner. That part I don't know, and I'm willing to take a course or upgrade myself. But basically, the idea of not wanting a teacher, not thinking you need a teacher, we think that is going to bring us independence and freedom. But it's not true. It's the other way around, So he gives an example. Imagine yourself going back in time. Now, I'm talking about you. I don't know how old you are. I'm not going to say, but let's say whatever. Let's say you're 35 years old.
50
and,
plus.
And I say, okay, Dan, you're 35 years old. Go back in time now, 5 years. And if you now, present day, goes back to teach Dan, who's 5 years younger, and look, I have some advice for you. Over these last 5 years, I've learned a lot. And I'd like to, how would you receive this guy, Dan, from the future, right? Back to the future. So that's what we have to ask ourselves. Like, if we ourselves were able to learn something, right, which obviously, hopefully in 5 years' time we do, if we would come back and tell the person who's not yet there 5 years prior, how would you accept that person? So this is unfortunately how we end up with our own parents, right? Mark Twain said, when I went to college, my father was a fool. When I came back 4 years later, I was amazed how much wiser he'd become. It's hilarious, right? So everyone makes mistakes, right? A fool learns from his own mistakes, hopefully. A wise man learns from other people's mistakes. So B'ezrat Hashem, when we're looking for wisdom, one of the main thing, and I think we spoke about this before, but we'll mention it again, in Pirkei Avot, chapter 1, Mishnah 6, it says, make for yourself a rabbi. Now, I have a different interpretation than most people, but let's leave it as the simple pshat. you have to find someone in order to acquire wisdom from.
Right.
I'll tell you what my pshat is. They used to make yourself into a rabbi, because that's literally what the Hebrew says. Aseh lecha rav, make for yourself a rabbi. So of course it really means find somebody to be your mentor. Make this relationship, forge this relationship. In other words, it's a directive. It's not a suggestion, right? I'm not going to say unfortunately, but it is a little bit hard to choose one rabbi sometimes. We call it a Talmud Muvchach, is like the star student, or a Rav Muvchach. It's my own personal rabbi. So the reason it's difficult if you're living in a really vibrant Jewish community is because maybe you had your own rabbi growing up in your school, and now he's older, you're older, and you still have an excellent relationship with you, and he taught you Aleph Bet, he taught you everything you know, and you have a certain relationship. And then you also have a congregational rabbi that things in the community come up, and it's best to go to him under certain circumstances to deal with issues. You might have a yeshiva rabbi later on. We're not talking about when you were younger. We're talking about when you were, let's say, I say younger. I don't mean grade school. I mean much later. And maybe you were in Kollel and you had a Rosh Hashiva. You have an excellent relationship with him. Or you take a Daf Yomi class, and that means learning a page a day. You can have so many relationships. The question is, which rabbi would you go to? And now even today, you can have, on the internet, certain rabbis that you listen to, that you listen to religiously. So it's a little bit difficult, but he does speak about trying to find one rabbi. We'll get to that shortly. How are you supposed to find this rabbi? So number one, hopefully the rabbi you're going to make for yourself is someone who's accessible. He has to be somewhat accessible, right? And someone you can identify with, someone who gives you meaningful answers to the questions you have. And you should ask us a lot of questions, test his wisdom, and try to get to know each other. He should get to know you, because if he's going to give you advice, he should know where you're coming from. You have to have a lot of trust. And it's somebody, most importantly, who's going to challenge you to move beyond your comfort zone. Today, everyone's looking for a comfort zone. I don't know, I shouldn't say everybody, but there's a lot of people. I think in the colleges, they have a whole comfort area. Like, don't mess with don't mess with
safe
people.
Space, yeah.
A safe space, that's what's important. But someone's going to encourage you to fulfill your potential. So you have to go beyond your comfort zone. So it's somebody who's willing to press you. So if you were like in sports, if you were involved in sports, what's a good coach? A good coach is going to push you to grow. If whatever it is you're doing, he has a stopwatch and he knows that you can do it in X amount of time. So he's going to push you. He's going to tell you have to do it in less time, right? Or you have to do more in the same amount of time, however he's judging the idea. But you got to get out of your safe zone. So don't look for someone who's just going to, agree with everything, right?
It's wise.
But I think this is one of the keys also. You have to be honest with yourself. We talked about in the 12-step programs, in recovery programs, one of the statements that's made in their big book or their blue book or their, I don't know what color it is today, but basically it says that people who follow this path usually are successful, except for those who are incapable of being honest with themselves. Well, the same thing here is true in life, right? If you're not going to be honest with yourself, certainly if you're not honest with yourself, you're not going to be honest with your rabbi, right? Now, King Solomon, for example, in Brachos 8a, we know that he was the wisest person who ever lived, but he had a mentor. His mentor was Shimi ben Gera. And the Talmud tells us that as long as his teacher was alive, he went for advice and he never made a mistake. When his Rebbe passed away, that's when he started to make mistakes. Now, the person you're choosing as a rabbi doesn't even have to be wiser than you, okay? In other words, it's best if he is, but you need somebody who has all these attributes we said before, somewhat objective, okay? Be somewhat objective. And that's not necessarily wiser, but so the other thing is that you don't have to follow him blindly either. What does that mean? It means you're allowed to disagree with him. Of course, it has to be with respect. Don't dismiss him. If you have questions about something he said, or you disagree with his advice, you have an obligation to go back to him and discuss it. Ask your questions, raise your concerns, and hear him out, right? And don't stop until he either straightens you out or you straighten him out. Right? It's the beauty about Judaism, right? Questions. I mean, I did hear horror stories. I never really experienced it, maybe because my questions were not, sarcastic. But there are some times where kids, especially, ask certain questions, and the rabbis, oh, come on, you know, dismiss the question outright, and that's not right. So I never experienced it. I have heard that such a thing existed. Maybe it doesn't exist today, but you want to debate the issue. You can ask the rabbi why, how, this, that, the other thing, and you know what? You have to go back and process what he says, and after trying to process it and not coming to a solution, then go back to him again with a fresh, restate the question, tell him what's really bothering you, see if he has some insight. And it doesn't mean you have to stick only to him. You can go to other people to get advice on how this rabbi is trying to explain something to you. You have this, we call it a juke in your head, some kind of it's a scratch disc, and you're not getting past it. And maybe someone else can help you have some insight. Now, the idea of assisting, he gives an example. I don't like the example because he says if the president of the United States came to visit, okay, you would ask him for all kinds of advice. So I don't know if today this example works, but let's say a very successful businessman, someone has integrity and has really, made it. So you would give him honor and you would ask him questions. You would do that for any wise person. You stand up when the person enters the room. You would help him. You would pay attention to him. And this is a concrete way to show that you honor and respect him because of his wisdom, right? You're putting a lot of value on the wisdom. Now, wisdom cannot be attained. There is wisdom that cannot be attained. There is a wisdom to be attained you cannot find in a textbook, right? So much wisdom that is not found in a textbook. Where are you going to find it, right? So it can only come from observing a person who embodies wisdom and seeing how his Torah wisdom shapes his every action. Again, how he responds to his wife, how he makes certain judgment calls. So watching how he applies his wisdom to day-to-day life is the best education. And that's the main point. And now we'll go through some more sources, right? We discussed this one idea of Joshua. Well, we have a statement in the Gemara that says, and I think we spoke about this before, and the rabbi said, I've learned much from my teachers, but even more from my friends, and from my students, I learned the most of all, right? Now, we're talking about learning from your rabbis. So how do we deal with this? This idea is actually just an introduction to the three ways that I decided we're only going to talk about one of them. Another, we're in way number 10, which is Shimush Chachamim, which is dealing with the rabbis. Yet the statement says, I learned more from my colleagues and even more from my students. It's interesting that the three, right, we're number 10, where it says Shimush Chachamim, attending the sages. The next one, 11, is Diktu Chaverim, is being careful analyzing with your friends, analyzing ideas with your friends. And the third, number 12, would be sharp discussion with students. So we're not going to deal with the latter two. We're only going to, but it's interesting that this Mishnah groups all three together. Okay, but we're going to deal right now just with Shimush Chachamim. I wanted to bring that in. Now, we discussed this idea with Joshua. Now, one of the ideas is you should try to spend a lot of time in your teacher's house, serving him and learn wisdom from his ways. The Ibn Ezra comments on that verse we just discussed that Joshua is not young, but he was still referred to as a lad because he acted towards Moshe as a youthful servant would. And yeah, I mentioned that he was not necessarily the sharpest tool in the shed, okay? But we learned a lot already what one needs to do. Interestingly enough, when Moses goes up to receive the Torah, where's Joshua? He's standing at the foot of the mountain, right? If you go to Exodus 24:13.
24:13 says, so Moses and Joshua, his servant, arose, and Moses ascended to the Mount of God.
Okay. So where did Joshua go? He didn't go up. He stood at the base of the mountain. He waited there 40 days. Now, Moses was up there, not eating, not drinking, and maybe even left his body. I mean, how could he be in such a state? Where was Joshua? Joshua was waiting for his Rebbe to return. He was so dedicated, but what was he looking forward? When Moses, of course, he came down, not at this point, but he comes down with a glow on his face. Who wouldn't want to see Moshe at that moment in time? When he comes back from having a conversation with God, what did he say? How did he speak to you? Right? To be the first one there, to get the info, right? To get the inside scoop. So that's something we should be doing to a certain extent. This is a lesson for us. Another idea is Joshua never stopped thinking about his Rebbe. In other words, during those 40 days, okay, Moses was obviously quite busy, but what was Joshua doing? I mean, maybe he was, what they call, with his thumbs, bored.
Twiddling.
But twiddling his thumbs. But nevertheless, I mean, he still had to eat. He had to go to the bathroom, but he didn't leave his place. He didn't leave his post. He was really waiting there. He had a strong connection. He had on his mind the whole time his Rebbe. And what can we learn from teachers' behavior? So when a student observes how his teacher acts and speaks regarding everyday things, the student actually sees how the Torah, which is part of his teacher's essence, shapes his thoughts and actions. So here's an example. It's brought down as a story by Rabbi Ruvain Feinstein. When a student is taught by his teacher, the teacher tells the students things which the teacher thinks about, that he thinks the student needs to hear, right? I prepare a shir, so I'm writing what I think he needs to hear. Consequently, the student doesn't have the opportunity to observe his teacher express his real personality. Right now, I'm on TV. I'm on YouTube. I'm sitting here with you. So you don't really see my full personality. I'm an actor. I'm sorry. I am. I mean, I'm worried about how my hair looks, right? I'm worried about is my button? Do I have a little, whatever, a stain? I mean.
I love the white hat the other week.
Yeah. Shabbos. It's only when the student serves his teacher at home and blends into the background. Somehow, I'm not thinking about trying to put on my best white hat for my student. My wife's having a conversation with me, or my kids are crawling all over me, and the milk spills, right? Or something crashes, and how do I react, right? So this teacher stops focusing on the student's needs so that the student can actually observe the teacher's real personality and observe and learn the Torah lessons which have undoubtedly shaped his teacher's personality. It's amazing. Okay, the next source we're going to get into is a very interesting source about Elisha. Elisha was the student of Elijah the prophet. Elisha was also a prophet. So we're going to go to a story in 2 Kings chapter 3, verse 11.
Verse 11, and Jehoshaphat said, is there no prophet of the Lord here that we may inquire of the Lord through him? And one of the king of Israel's servants answered, here is Elisha, the son of Shaphat, who poured water on Elijah's hands.
Okay, let me get to the main point, and then we'll go back and go deeper. They're looking for water. They actually are 7 days in ready to go to war, and they're afraid that they don't have enough water. I mean, they're all going to die of thirst instead of, even pounding
Battle,
the
yeah.
enemy. I mean, so basically, they're looking for maybe a prophet to tell them what to do, somebody who's going to give them some guidance. And one of the servants of the king says, "Hey, you got Elisha right here. You know who he is? He's the one who poured water on his Rebbe's hands. Elijah was his Rebbe." So we see the one who's going to save the day is the one who served his rabbi. I know there's a lot more to the story because they're looking for water. Okay, let's go through the Gemara. So the Gemara begins by telling us, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, said in the name of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, greater is serving Torah, meaning serving a rabbi, serving the Chachamim, is greater than learning itself. I'll just read here. Gedola shimusha shel Torah yoter mimiluda. It's greater to serve a Talmid Chacham than sit and learn with him from a book. It's a greater attribute. Okay?
For sure.
And
Hands
the
on.
verse, and the verse that's brought, this verse is, we just quoted it, Po Elisha ben Shaphat asher yatzak mayim al yedei Eliyahu. Al yedai Eliyahu. He poured the water on Eliyahu's hands. So it does say yatzak. Yatzak means pour. It doesn't say lamad. Shouldn't the person said, "Oh, here's Elisha who learned from Eliyahu"? No, it doesn't say we should go and find, Elisha's right here. He's going to help us because he learned from Eliyahu. But rather, he's the one who poured the water on Elijah's hands. And from here, the Gemara concludes that learning Malame Gedola Shimusha Yota Miluda. So the idea of serving the Chacham is greater than learning from books. So I have a lot of comments here. One of the ideas to bring down in Proverbs chapter 1, verses 5 through 6. It's a little bit, you have to go to the original Hebrew, so you can start with the English and then I'll
Verse 5 and 6?
Chapter 1, verses 5 through 6, yeah.
And it was that when Ahab died, the king of Moab rebelled against the king of Israel. Now,
Proverbs chapter 1.
Oh, I mean Kings. I'm sorry, but go. Why is it not gone? Uh-oh, forgive me. It showed Proverbs. My mistake, sir. Let the wise man hear and increase learning. The understanding man shall acquire wise counsels, to understand an allegory and a figure, the words of the wise and their riddles. Beautiful.
Okay, so the wise man, the person who wants to become wise, right? He's obviously the wise man. He wants to hear more and increase his learning. So he's going to try to understand and acquire counsel through allegory. What is, now in, I had a different translation. It said epigram, but that's what allegory is. Maybe not. Maybe the other one. Let me just see. I'm not sure which one. In Hebrew, it says lahavin mashal, which is allegories, or malitza. I think the word malitza, it says and a figure, but let me use this word, epigram. The word malitza is an epigram. What is that? It's a pithy saying or remark expressing an idea in a clever and amusing way. So in other words, the first one is called an analogy. That's what a mashal. We know that they're not so clear. You need a lot of understanding and depth to understand what the person's really trying to tell you through hints. And again, it says in a figure. I don't know what a figure is, but we use the word epigram, melitza.
I get it. Yeah.
It's almost like savvy. That's good. And the words of the wise in their riddles. So an enigma. That's what's a riddle? A person or a thing, or here we're talking about a statement, that is mysterious, puzzling, or difficult to understand. So how would you be able to figure it out? Usually facial expressions even would hint to you that it could be sarcasm, or it could be, there's more to it. It's not just so simple. To be in the person's presence. And usually these ideas are not brought forth necessarily in a classroom. Of course, a classroom would, person to person would be better than Zoom or Skype, right? To be in the person's presence where you can really get a feel for the expressions beyond the words. It's different than reading a book. I mean, okay, some people would highlight or put in capitals if they want to get certain points across. But when you're in front of the person, you're certainly getting a better feel. Okay, so based on that idea, there's a comment by the Al-Sheikh, and he actually brings in the name of the Vilna Gaon, that Yedias halacha lamaaseh, that just to understand how a halacha is a simple, I don't know how simple, but let's say a straightforward law, that could be learned bekalut k'mishtamesh es rabo. It's actually more easily learned when you're in your Rebbe's presence. And you learn from how he acts and how he's actually behaving towards a certain thing. It's so much easier. You're sitting and learning in a book. I do this all the time with my students. They can't picture it. We can learn something. It sounds very theoretical. And they'll turn around and says, could you show us? It's like, so when they come to my house for Shabbos and they're sitting at the table and they're watching, then it becomes, oh my God, we learned about that. I didn't understand. Now I see it. It's like amazing. Now, when it comes to lipsoch halakha mihalimud, let's say you're just learning in a book, you need to seem to learn all of Shas. Shas is all these books behind me. If you want to, learn a certain subject, you want to know what to do, how do you know unless you learn the gamut of everything? And that obviously takes a tremendous amount of wisdom, chachma, bina, videya, so much time also in order to put together ideas. Now, we talked about the idea of what a Gemara is. Gemara, I think we talked about in the very beginning, the concept of Talmud or Gemara is working out contradictions, right? You have this principle and you have that principle, and somehow or another you have an action that doesn't go black and white with this and doesn't go black and white with that. Somehow you have to mesh them together and put them together. So if you're sitting and learning from a book, you never know that. It's only through hachrat hadat, being able to weigh and determine based on the changes or the situation, how to behave. And that you're not going to see in a book necessarily. But you will witness it when you're around a live human being. There's another idea brought down in Pirkei Avot. It's the first chapter, and I believe it all depends on the number you have, but it's probably Mishnah 17 in many places, that it says learning is not the ikar, but the maaseh, meaning it's not learning, but doing. That's the main thing. Like the whole purpose of learning, one of the purposes of learning is in order to put into practice. Okay, so based on that, again, we're relating back to the idea of how to really figure out how it's done. So concerning this idea, and the Maharitz Chiyus writes again in the name of the Gra that when you learn halacha from watching your rabbi, it becomes embedded into your heart.
Alive.
And watching more than if you just learn it from listening. The seeing is much more powerful than hearing. So usually when you're sitting in a classroom, you're really only using, I mean, obviously you might be looking at the words, you might be looking, but the idea of watching it done in practice is much more powerful. And the Hebrew says, nisharish balev, it becomes enrooted into your heart by seeing much more.
Beautiful.
The Al-Sheikh writes, he adds, שבכלל שימוש תלמידי חכמים הוא לראות את הנהגת רבו בענייני חול. That what you are watching, when you're watching your rabbi, you're watching him do things, even what we call mundane things. And you can learn so much because everything he does, what we would call a mundane thing, there's nothing mundane, like it's not really mundane. So in other words, someone comes over to him and asks for tzedakah. So you're watching how he behaves with the person, right? Someone says, oh, the markolet, the supermarket just called, and they said we owe them X amount of money. What's his reaction, right? How's he dealing with it? Was it true? And he's going to pull out his checkbook, and he's going to write the check, and he's going to make sure that it gets there. See how he behaves, right? Is he with honesty and integrity and, all his emotions? Because this is, I'm going to call it chol. There's nothing, chol means mundane, but there's nothing mundane when it comes to a Torah scholar, right? All his actions are for the sake of heaven. So when he's not sitting with a book open, how does he behave? I'm just like, he says, how does he behave according to the Torah? And through this, you'll be so much is revealed. So many details are coming to light. The Maharsha writes that when you learn from your rabbi, so there are times that the rabbi teaches things that are not lamaisa. In other words, he's teaching you theoreticals. Right? You're sitting in front and you have a book, and a lot of it could be theoretical. And therefore, that's why when you're serving the Torah scholar, so through that, you'll actually see in actuality what to do. Because what he's doing, right? It's not theoretical anymore. And there's so much value to that. A sefer called Ohel Moshe, he writes that even Sha'af Shemeshamesh midvarav shemeshusha Torah, meaning lumid the Torah halacha l'maisa. Okay, we pretty much said that. It's always about what is real. But when you're learning in Shas, you're learning in the books, a lot of it is not just theoretical, but you're constantly working out the contradictions. And you really don't know how to apply it. But when you're around this person who's already worked it out, it's so much revealing. Now, he's making a claim, this is incredible, that if someone doesn't do what we call shimush chachamim, all they do is learn from the books, they're called an ignoramus. And that's a strong statement. Although, on the other hand, we're going to see the Maharsha, he says no, and like Rashi might say also, that when you're actually learning the Talmud, the Gemara, where you're actually hearing the reasons behind everything, that's like you're sitting in the presence of these rabbis. And again, like we started off by saying that you learn from your colleagues, you learn from your students quite a lot, that when you're sitting and learning Gemara, not by yourself, it's important you're not sitting by yourself, but you're sitting with other people. It's like the rabbi is right there in the room. We're talking about rabbis that lived thousands, hundreds and thousands of years ago. So there is some benefit to it, but it's obviously not the same when you have a real live person in front of you.
Wow.
There's another idea, and we did discuss this, I'm sure, but if we didn't, I'm sure people are familiar with this. This would be there's two ideas. One's in Psalms 111, verse 10. It's not the only time that idea is expressed.
111, verse 10?
Yeah.
Reads, the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord, good understanding to all who perform them, his praise endures forever.
So if the beginning of wisdom is the fear of Hashem, remember, this is the 48 ways to wisdom, right? This is just one of them. So if you're around this person who you respect and fear, because he has a lot of wisdom and you want it, so you're going to mishamesh, you're going to serve him. So there is in Pirkei Avot, it's chapter 3, in different editions, it's different numbers, but let's say it's number 11. Rabbi Hananiah ben Dosa said, for one who puts fear of sin before wisdom, so that wisdom will endure. One who puts his wisdom before the fear of sin, the wisdom does not endure. So trying to be around a Rebbe, I don't know if people understand. Maybe they do from a church. They have this idea of a clergyman. There's some kind of, I don't know. But in Judaism, it's very different. you stand up for someone who's over 70. You stand up for your Rebbe. The whole classroom stands up when he comes in the room, like the president of the United States, like William Buffett, somebody who is, lahavdil, someone who's wise. So,
Wow.
you have to have this awe when he comes in the room. And so therefore, by being around him, this helps with the awe. Now, there's another idea that it's actually wrong for a rabbi to prevent his students from serving him, because you're stealing that opportunity for him to have awe. Now, it's very funny and awkward for me. I'm walking and I'm carrying a lot of books, and I got my students are fighting with each other to grab the books out of my hands. It's quite amazing, and I feel like a little bit embarrassed. You know what I mean? Like, it's only a few books. I can handle it. Sometimes it's a lot, and I do really appreciate it. But it's just like one little thing. Come on. But they're very eager. So I should not prevent them from doing that, because this awe is very important. Having this awe, having this fear, as we just saw, is the beginning of wisdom. And they want it. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? I mean, because I had a headbutt when I was, working in Christianity. And after I'd gone back to an old church after 10 years, okay? And, I watched this thing grow. And I know exactly what you're talking about, but the leadership of this place had grown to the point where they were being served hand and foot, and they actually did a couple services a day. There's a couple thousand people that attended, and the point being that they had a pastor's lounge, and they were being served hand and foot. And I got asked what I thought, and I was I was almost shocked that they would actually let people serve them in that fashion. But I see where you're coming from, the angle where you're coming from. But can it not cross a line where, there's a mindset that expects a degree of lavishment that's incorrect?
Yeah, for sure. Look, I don't want to talk about individuals because I don't know people, but I've heard stories. So there's a group of people that I learned with in a certain city in the United States, and they all were part of a I guess, what do you call it, Jews for Jesus, a messianic group. And they had a certain teacher who expected, in other words,
demanded almost.
They went on tours, and he said, okay, who wants to be blessed by paying for me? Like to get into, so we all know not to accept gifts. That's why it's like there's a turmoil going on, that one should not want to accept the gifts, but at the same time, we have a directive. I didn't get to the source yet. Hopefully, you'll find it. That it says that one should not prevent his student from serving him, because you're stealing this opportunity from him.
From him to learn.
So if you're balanced, where you're kind of shying away from it, not expecting it, but once it happens, you let it go, and let it happen. They all left that guy, this particular guy, and some of them are in process of converting, some of them are 100% into the Noahide and not interested in moving forward. But it was universal. They all felt this was wrong, that this person was taking advantage, and he was using this lesson for his own advantage. And in that sense, it would be wrong. Okay?
Right. But there is what to be said for sure. You're touching on about the service side, and I just love how you brought it forward with Joshua, son of Nun, there waiting at the base of the mountain. This is an angle I had not considered. Thank you, Rabbi.
Right. Okay, I just want to go a little bit into the Gemara itself. I'm sorry, the story of Elisha and the servant of the king who said, "Hey, Elisha's right here. He's the one that poured water on Elijah's hands." So this is a comment based on the Gemara, that this verse is bringing this idea that Yehoram ben Achav, the king of Israel, and Yehoshaphat, the king of Yehuda, they went out to fight a war against Moab. Okay, and they were walking for 7 days in the desert of Edom, and they didn't have any water to drink or to give to their camp, the camp of the army, and for their animals. And they were concerned lest, on account of the lack of water, they would be so thirsty they might even die of thirst, and they wouldn't have any power, any energy to fight. So Yehoshaphat, the king of Yehuda, sought out if there was a prophet of God that would direct them, that could instruct them what to do. So answered one of the servants of the king, and that's when he said, "Here is Elisha, the son of Shaphat, who poured water on the hands of Elijah." Now Rashi tells us there that the pouring of the water that Elisha poured was on the hands of Elijah, was at the time that Elijah brought together all of the false prophets of Baal. And remember, he said you can't stand on the fence, you got to choose sides. And he put water into a moat, and he put the offerings in the middle. And of course, the Jewish, his offerings were accepted. The offerings of the Baal, nothing happened. But so at that point in time, that's when Elisha poured the waters on Elijah's hands. Now, that was before they offered up the cow. He poured an additional 4 jugs of water into the moat in order to increase the miracle that took place. And that's when the fire came down from heaven, and it consumed the offering, even though there was a lot of water there. So the water that was all around the altar, and it was filled up, and obviously this all created such a miracle. Now, wait till you hear this miracle. What does it mean that he poured water on his Rebbe's hands? The water flowed out from his fingers. It's amazing. When Elijah needed water poured, he called his student, Elisha, and Elisha poured the water that came from his fingers. That's pretty miraculous.
I see that in Rashi there, yeah.
Like a spring. That's why they thought, meaning the servant of the king who brought Elisha forward, he thought that it would be fitting for Elisha to do for them another miracle. And that's why, it wasn't just that he was the student of Elijah, but he was also the one that brought the water. That they thought Elisha would prophesize for them in the name of God what to do about the water. And if you go to the same chapter, it was chapter 3, verses 17 and 18, you'll hear the rest of the story. Because what happened? Remember, they needed water. So where did the water come from? What happened? Let's
17?
read 17 and 18.
Do you want me to read it, Rabbi?
Yeah.
For so has the Lord said, you shall not see wind, neither shall you see rain, yet that valley will be filled with water, and you and your cattle and your beasts shall drink, and this will be slight in the eyes of the Lord, and he will deliver Moab into your hands.
Okay, I'll just read 19. You will strike every fortified city and every choice city, and you shall fell every good tree, and you shall stop up all the springs of water. You shall cluster every good field with stones. Basically, what happened, there was no wind, there was no rain, but it must have rained somewhere else, and the waters overflowed the banks, and the channels or whatever brought the water exactly where it needed to be brought for them. And they had the water, and that was miraculous. And there's a lot more to the story I don't want to go into, but that I wanted to fill in some of the background to the story. This is the merit. This is what one can gain. I'm just saying, this is what one can gain from Shimush Chachamim, that you'll have the ability to save people. This is
amazing.
And there's so much more. So there's another verse, a different rabbi. It's actually the Tanit Be'Eliyahu, which is a very ancient source, brings a different source from where you could know that serving is greater than learning, and that is in 1 Kings chapter 19, verse
1
21.
Kings, chapter 19, verse 21. 21 reads, "And he returned from after him, and he took the yoke of oxen and slaughtered them, and with the gear of the oxen he cooked the meat for them. And he gave the people, and they ate. And he rose and followed Elijah and ministered to him."
So the last part of it, he rose and followed Elijah and ministered to him. This in Hebrew is yishartehu, serving, and he served. So this was a proof. We're talking about Elisha, right? He went and served his rabbi.
Wow.
Now, keep in mind, it doesn't say that he learned from him. It says that he served him. So we learn here that serving is greater than learning. I just have a few highlights left to go through.
That's beautiful.
And in the Mishnah, Rabbi Aaron, he brings down that there are two parts of serving a Talmid Chacham. A Talmid Chacham, first of all, even the word Talmud, how do you know he's a Talmid Chacham? Talmud means a student of the wise. The one you're serving is a student of the wise. He's still learning. If you have a guy who's so arrogant, like you were describing these people sitting around waiting for the students to run around and do all their...
They weren't that bad. You know, Rabbi, when I did that, they announced that following week that they were hosting a barbecue and they were going to serve the rest of the people, which I thought was profound and a good retort. But the point being, I did not understand the lesson the way you've brought it out so far today. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Look, if a Rebbe's in yeshiva and he's talking to his students and he asks another student to make some photocopies so they're prepared, I get it, but to use your students as servants, that's not what it's about. It's having them around you, when you're relaxing. And there's some really crazy stories in the Gemara. I mean, a lot of times the student is carrying the Rebbe's towel to the mikveh. Can't go in the same time as your Rebbe, but they're waiting outside. There's a story about someone who wanted to know what happens when the Rebbe's with his wife, and he snuck underneath the bed, and he was listening, and he says, "Rebbe, I'm trying to learn everything about, how to do everything in life." It was a really crazy story, but okay, that's not for now. But you get the idea that it's about serving them, and how are you going to get close to them to hear and to see? So you have to say, "Can I help you? Can I run some errands for you? I'm talking about from your side, so you have an opportunity to be around them. The idea is to be around them. Okay, so here there's two sides to this idea. Shnei chalakim b'shimush talmidei chachamim. It's on account this idea that we said it's greater to do the service than just learning. So one is the actual idea of just learning. It's the etzem halimud, the idea, and halachos, to know exactly what to do. That's the benefit. Because most ideas are organized where? Here, in the mind. But still, you need hadracha. You still need guidance. How to make these determinations and how they come to fruition. It's not just theoretical. You want to know exactly what to do. And the issue is that there's so many variables. The yishtana ba'ofanim shonim, there's so many differences. So you learn in the law book one thing, but when you see it, it's different. Like I told you over and over again, I learned with you, but I didn't see it in practice. Now I'm seeing it in practice. It's a whole different, it just makes such an impression. And, when you're learning just something theoretical, it doesn't stick. So he says, it's not enough just to have book learning. But the thing has to be learned with deep contemplation about the action of the rabbi. That's the first thing. The second thing is through coming close and really investigating what your rabbi is doing, the Talmud Chacham is doing, it's going to have influence on you. And it's modrich al yado, it's going to guide you more. So what happens is like this. We're too involved with our environment. Our environment influences greatly. So we know that it has an influence. So which influence is going to win out? The influence of the rabbi or the influence of your other friends who don't know so much? So the Rambam actually writes concerning this, that when you see somebody, let me just read it here. Shederach bri'ato shel adam liyot nimshach b'da'otav u'ma'asav acharei'av v'chaveirav. That when someone sees all his friends acting one way, we call peer pressure, I guess. He's noah ka'anchem medinato. He acts like everyone else. That's why you have to do shimush chachamim. You have to get close to that gadol, that person who's great. Come close to him and learn from his ways in all actions of life. And this is so important. We're talking about someone gave you $10 million to build a bridge. What are you going to do? Go on the internet and go to YouTube and tutorial and find out how to build a bridge? You're going to have to go and spend some time with the greatest bridge constructors.
Engineer.
That's what it's about. And let me just read this here. The Ein Yaakov explains that serving the Torah scholar, that is, what does it mean to serve him? Is to have fear, have like an Eved, like a servant who fears his master. That, like we talked about, the lad, right? He didn't leave his post for 40 days. Moses is up on the mountain, and the guy, Yeshua, is just hanging, waiting for his Rebbe to return. The whole idea is his Rebbe is on his mind. That's called fear. He didn't move from his place. Since when you have proper fear from your rabbi, that is serving him. You're going to end up serving him like a servant, like a slave. And this is going to bring you, this is going to make you a Talmud Chacham. Remember, this is the 40 ways to wisdom. So Shimush Chachamim, if you do this is what Joshua, he became. Again, I don't want to say it. It sounds horrible. He was not the sharpest tool in the shed. And yet he became in Moses's place. So here, another Gemara that brings down, someone who fears from the Chachamim, he himself will become a Talmud Chacham. Okay, so we'll leave it at that. That was a good start, right? It leads us into this idea. I'm sure there's a lot to think about. And this is just one of 48 ways. And it's to bring it into our lives. The opportunity does not come every day for every person. So one should seek it out. Find opportunities to hang out with Talmidei Chachamim. And it could mean you've come up with an excuse. Can I come over and clean your house? Can I come over and wash your dishes? Can I come over and help you in the garden? I don't know. you know when he goes out of his house to go to the shul, you just meet him and, can I carry your books? And you have an opportunity to walk with him. Maybe he's talking to someone else, but you get to hear. Now, let me explain. When someone's doing shimush, someone who wants to become a dayan, a judge, someone who wants to be able to make determinations, they do shimush. They sit in the court and they listen, right? Usually the only people that sit in the court are, right, the litigants or the lawyers, and that's it. I'm talking about a Jewish court. You don't just, it's not about, people taking pictures and writing reports. This is private, right? The judgment may become public at the end, but what goes on in the courtroom is somewhat private. But there are students of the dayanim, students of the judges who have permission to sit there and hear the deliberations, because that's where the juice, that's where the energy, that's where the life of what's behind the halacha. It's like sitting and reading a page of
Peeling back
Talmud.
the veneer.
He
Yeah.
says this, he says that.
Mhm.
How's that? It's all about the contradictions and working them out and resolving them.
Yeah.
So the same thing in judgment. You know, one rabbi, the same rabbi says, on the one hand, I could see it like this. On the other hand, I can see it like that. And then you get to see which way he does determine in the end based on what the other judges have to add to the conversation. So it's called shimush. It's exactly what we're talking about here. In order to become a dayan, you have to do like they call stage. That's maybe Hebrew, like an internship, right? Like an internship. So I don't know how, but I can only imagine. Doctors, right? There's a certain period of time after, towards the end of their school, before they become these doctors, they're treated like, I don't even want to say on the air, right? They're not treated with much respect, that's for sure. And it's quite humiliating and demeaning to have so much behind you and yet so much ahead of you. And you're in this period where I don't know what they're paid, if they're paid anything, right? And they're treated like, get me the scalpel or clean up after me. Like, I mean, but they know that in order to get to that next level, they have to do what this thing is called shimush. I'm going to call it shimush. I don't know. It's lahavdil, like it's a little bit different than what we're talking about, but it's the same general idea, right? You get the point?
Yeah, for sure, Rabbi. If you have a few more minutes, I just want to bounce a couple of things off you from a B'nai Noach perspective, and just get your feedback, because I know that somebody on YouTube's asking a question that's in the same line as what I'm feeling, and coming out of Christianity, I want you to know I feel it's a graduation, just like you say. It may have been an internship, but I know I've had to flush a lot of everything learned there. But they really use this point of servitude. Okay. And in their religion, it's, the greatest of all is the servant of all, is the way that they push it hard. And when I got to the point where I said enough's enough, and I became a B'nai Noach publicly, okay, after 32 years as an adult doing that, when I put it aside, I remember sitting in a group with a bunch of Christians, and this was probably the very last time I actually sat in a group with Christians before I publicly became a B'nai Noach, and never ever went back since. I got to the point where somebody made a comment, and it was so drippy on this endless servitude. I got to the point and I said, yeah, okay, so I can hang around for 10 years, do everything for the right to scrub your toilets. And I had to walk away. And we've got a question online from somebody called Seeking Truth. And he says that I understand serving out of respect and appreciation of the rabbi or person they're learning from. But he says, if it goes unchecked, doesn't it become a little bit like idolatry? And I think that, you've really balled this together with the question of internship. Those coming out of Christianity, or those coming out of a foreign religion to turn to the wisdom of the rabbis, there's a point where servitude is no longer servitude, and it can become idolatry. Can you elaborate a little bit to clarify, like just bring this into focus, like a lens a little bit, because what you've talked about today is the beauty of the reality of honest servitude, whereas a lot of people have come out of some real distortion of it.
I thought I clarified it, but I'll try my best again. If it's coming from the rabbi to expect it, that's wrong. And I don't know if that's clear, but it's the person himself feeling the need to come close to the rabbi and finding an excuse or a reason to come close. Even to be creative and make it up. I see your garden's a mess. Can I come by? Can I come by? If your rabbi says, I need help in my garden, but I'm not paying, then there's something off there. If he says, I need help in my garden and I'm paying a fair rate, or I'm even willing to pay more, okay, I mean, is that servitude? I don't think so.
No.
I mean, he's trying to help you if you need the money. If you don't need the money, say no, I can't do it, and just get someone else to do it who does need the money. I don't see. I'm not really sure where this idea is coming from, other than if it goes unchecked, meaning if the person is off balance, this rabbi is way out of line.
Yeah.
And so we're talking about when the person comes to you and says, "Can I help you?" You should not say no. That's a hard thing for me to say because I want to feel independent. I don't want to, but you know what? I know that this is good for him, so I'll allow him to do it. But to push him, to force him, that is obviously wrong. Now, I wanted to bring up another idea. In the 12-step program, it's a word called service. Coming and setting up the coffee and setting up the chairs and, I don't know, whatever they do, reading certain things. They call that service. Now, I'm not so sure that's true service. I think the real service is going and being a sponsor and helping more people. But let's say starting at the bottom, like any job, like we said, you don't have the experience, so you start by making the coffee. Man, if you don't know how to make that, ask them. What do I do? I plug in the water. I turn on the lights. What do I have to do? It's part of your recovery to become selfless. That is in the 12-step program. So too here, it's incumbent upon the person, number one, is everything we talked about, to have awe and reverence for their teacher, to become selfless. It's not all about me, and there are people, I imagine, that in order to acquire wisdom, you have to be like a sponge, and it's all about you. But look, the rabbis, usually people are not paying. I mean, okay, there's schools, there's tuition, okay, there's whatever rules that you have to live by. Maybe there's a Torah nut, and there's certain expectations. I don't know if that goes, what he's saying, about unchecked. So if it's an institution that has certain rules and they expect people to clean up after themselves, clean their rooms, their dormitory rooms, or set up for the meal.
That's common.
You're the one gaining, and it's supposedly, let's say, it brings down the tuition, right? Otherwise, they'd have to hire more people. So I think it has to do with, is it the rabbi who's trying to take advantage? And there probably are people who are, so you have to, unchecked. I don't buy it. You have to check it out. It shouldn't go unchecked, right? A complaint should be made if demands are being made that are unreasonable. But if the rabbi says, "I need a few volunteers, I'm going, I'm going shopping for Shabbos. I need some volunteers. Who wants to come with me?" And you have 30 people, and you only need 3 of them. So listen, if it's the same 3 people, that might be a problem.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like maybe the students need to
favoritism.
Students who are always volunteering need to say, "Look, we're having such a good time with our rabbi. I can't believe you're not volunteering."
I guess the teacher's pet mentality is one of those things that is a general dissuader for a lot of people. I mean, there's nothing wrong with going out of your way, but I find the general consensus is that people, a teacher's pet. But there's an honesty in Joshua, in Joshua's servitude, and I like how you brought out today. Maybe he wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed, but the reality is Hashem brought him to be a leader of the nation through his time in that servitude with Moshe, and I think you've really hit on something that's deep there. I just know that those B'nai Noach that have come out of especially Christianity and idolatry, there's almost their eyes are too on their leader, and they miss the whole point of Hashem in the whole picture and what Hashem's doing behind the scene. And idolatry, has a way of blinding their minds and their eyes, and they get it out of whack, and they end up spending their entire days, from till death. And they think they've done something effective, and at the end of the day, they spent all their days doing work in vain, and nobody wants to do work in vain. And I think the world needs the light of Torah clarified for them, so that they can actually serve and be more community focused. I think, this
I think,
series is,
yeah, I think you said it right on. So let me just clarify what I want to say. It's coming from the student's interest in gaining wisdom, that
Mhm.
he himself has fear, he has awe, he has respect, and he'll find any reason or excuse to get close to see, um, in actuality, how the person behaves. If he doesn't like the way he behaves, run far away.
Right. I love
Okay.
how you touched on today. The book smart person alone is missing something, that there's an angle of wisdom that is not taught in books, and there's profound nugget of truth there that's so weighty that everybody's got to grab the hem of a rabbi and learn from it. Yeah, it's just wonderful stuff, sir. Well,
Okay.
on
So
that note, I guess, are we going to wind her down for this week?
we're going to wind down Shavua Tov, and yeah.
Okay, now for next week, Rabbi, I am on an emergency call in my employment, so I won't be able to broadcast. So Hashem willing, a couple weeks from today, Hashem willing.
Sure. Great. Looking forward.
All right, folks. That was part 10 of the 48 Ways to Wisdom here on Beyond the Seven, live from Jerusalem with Rabbi Aaron David Poston. Hope to see you in a couple weeks. Till then, have a wonderful, wonderful time.
Your